So hello everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Important Bird Area's first spring webinar on bird identification. Because of COVID-19, we decided to try something different this year, as we do often hold an in-person shorebird workshop. So my name is Amanda Shave, and I'm the coordinator for the Manitoba Important Bird Areas program. So fortunately, those workshops had to be canceled this year. But yeah, we'd like to welcome you to Manitoba IBA's very first webinar. So a couple of housekeeping comments. The presentation is being recorded so that we can hopefully put it on YouTube or somewhere else so that people can access it later or watch it if they couldn't join us today. As I had said earlier, everyone in the webinar will have their microphones muted just so we don't get feedback while Christian's presenting. But you can ask questions through the chat function, and you should find that at the top right-hand corner of your screen. It'll look like a little speech bubble, and it might have a little red bubble next to it with a number if people have typed. So you can ask questions through the chat function, and we'll get Christian to answer some at the end, and if we run out of time, he's also agreed to answer the questions. We'll have them recorded, and we'll send that out through email. Christian Artuso is a dedicated ornithologist and conservationist with many years working with our local birding scene in Manitoba. He's currently a wildlife biologist with the Canadian Wildlife Service in Ottawa, and he has been key in helping set up the International Shorebird Survey, or ISS, in Manitoba. He coordinated our Manitoba Breeding Bird Atlas and has been a member of the Manitoba Important Bird Area Steering Committee since its inception. So a big thank you to Christian to start us off on this series as a guest speaker. So Christian, if you can hear me, I think we are good to go.
I'll start by giving you a little bit of a definition of what a shorebird is. Actually, there's more shorebirds in the world than we think of in Manitoba. Here in Manitoba, we think of them as our plovers, such as the killdeer there, our avocets and stilts, such as the American avocet that you see on the screen, and our sandpipers, such as that Baird sandpiper in the bottom right. But there are actually 14 families, and they're basically the ones that are in the order Shorebirds with the gulls, but that don't have webbed feet like the gulls. And of course, the name shorebirds, you would think of them as being on shorelines, and they do spend a lot of time on mudflats and shorelines, but shorebirds are in almost every habitat, from forest to tundra to coastal areas and everything in between. They're a bit more diverse than the name shorebird would suggest. And they're some of the greatest migrants in the world. So if you look at the map on the bottom there with the tracks, those are individual bar-tailed godwits that have gone from Alaska all the way to New Zealand, which is a pretty crazy migration. And then the map on the top right there is a red knot showing the path of a red knot from the Canadian Arctic to Tierra del Fuego in southern Argentina and Chile. So basically from the Arctic to the Antarctic, or subantarctic at least, and back again every year. That bird is, with the flag, is called B9, or the moonbird, because that individual red knot has traveled more than the distance from Earth to the moon in her lifetime. Now, shorebirds are pretty tiny. The smallest ones are least sandpipers. They're only 13 centimeters. Maybe because they're in open habitats, people think of shorebirds as a bit bigger, but they're not much bigger than a sparrow. Just a least sandpiper, if you see it next to a sparrow, is pretty much the same size, except the legs are, of course, elongated, and the bill is, of course, elongated. But the body size on some of these little shorebirds is as little as 15 grams. And The biggest ones are the curlews. We have long-billed curlew in North America, and the biggest curlews are, even at the very biggest shorebird, is less than a kilogram in weight. And there's some super cool aspects to their biology. For example, they have a fixed clutch size. They always lay 4 eggs. There are some polyandrous species where the females lay clutches with multiple males, and the males do all the child rearing. Some of them have sexually dichromatic, meaning that the males and females have different plumages, and so on and so forth. So 2 examples there. The redneck phalarope is polyandrous and sexually dichromatic, and the spotted sandpiper on the bottom is polyandrous but the plumages are the same. And we're going to talk about bill shapes and things like that in identification. That's important, but I just want to make one quick point that actually the bills of shorebirds are quite flexible. They're quite sensitive, tactile. They can feel what is at the tip of their bill, and the bill shape being flexible can actually change. So that pectoral sandpiper you see there in the foreground normally has a down curved bill like the one you see in the background, but in this particular posture, the bill tip is turned up, and that's because of its flexibility. And now shorebirds occur in some big flocks. They're very impressive to watch when they flock up, but as a rule, most of our shorebirds are actually declining, and some of them are declining quite significantly. There's quite a few that have been added to our Species at Risk Act recently. And overall, I'm going to sort of wave my mouse a bit here. I don't know if that's easy to see, I hope so, but overall, shorebirds are in one of the groups that have declined most significantly. As a guild, they have declined approximately 40% since 1970. The only things that are doing worse, basically, are the grassland birds and some of our aerial insectivores like chimney swifts and swallows. So they are in trouble. We don't necessarily always know why they are in trouble, but we are trying, and this is where the Important Bird Area program is playing its part, and where you can play your part. We are trying to get a better handle of what's going on with our shorebird populations. And for the Important Bird Area program, and you can see the website there on the screen, we've done a lot of shorebird monitoring, including some blitzes of key sites, but also this thing called the ISS, or the International Shorebird Survey. And this is one where we're always looking for new volunteers. So if after this talk you're interested in helping out with helping us keep track of shorebird populations, then please talk to Amanda and inquire about the ISS. Okay, so here's a little outline of the rest of the talk. That finishes my introduction. And again, you can type questions or comments in the chat as we go. I can see what you type, so if you type a question, I will be able to pick up on it, and if there's time, I will circle back to it. Basically, the rest of the talk is just identification of our shorebirds. I am going to go through the 3 families in the order, and I think that you might have received a PDF handout on them. If not, we can provide it later. This is kind of my little cheat sheet of shorebirds. So we'll start with the plovers, which we have 5 species in Manitoba. Then we'll go to the next family which are the avocets and stilts. We basically have 1 of each, 1 avocet and 1 stilt. And then the big family is the sandpipers. I'm going to go through the 26 sandpiper species that occur regularly in Manitoba. There are others that are quite rare. And I'll basically use the order of starting in the biggest and going to the smallest. Although I like to group like with like, so it's not a perfect match. But that basically, I'll look at the 2 godwits together. For example, I'll look at things like a woodcock and snipe together because of their similarity. But as a general rule, I'm starting big and moving small. And for this talk, I'm just going to talk about the breeding plumages. They're coming through, they're migrating. Some, like the killdeer, have already arrived, and they're in their spring colors when they're easiest. So we're going to start there and focus on the spring plumages for this talk. Okay, so the plovers, 5 species. The general rule is the plovers have short bills and they're visual hunters. They catch things by pecking at the surface with their short bills. And they typically, for that reason, have slightly large eyes. You can see this killdeer here has caught a cricket, and probably that cricket was captured by the killdeer running at the surface and seeing the cricket and grabbing it with its short little dagger of a bill. Plovers are generally visual hunters, although they too have tactile bill tips and they too can feel things with their bill. So the killdeer is actually our second largest plover, but I'm going to start with the killdeer because the killdeer is such a, I think most people know a killdeer, and it's a perfect place to start. And so what you'll see in the top of the corner is a little bit of text about the bird that I will sort of talk about some of those points. And you'll also, I usually put a little bit about the nesting habitat of the bird in the other corner somewhere. So the killdeer, about 27 centimeters, is quite a large plover. It's what I would call a medium-sized shorebird. And the most recognizable aspect is the double breast band. So you can see the black band around the neck and then the black band across the neck and across the upper breast. So if you see that, if you see 2 bands, you know it's a killdeer right away. It's so unique, such an easy feature. The face is very well marked as well. I'll just go back to show you the stripes on the face, and there's that little red eye ring. That red of the around the eye might be hard to see at a distance, but the facial pattern and the double breast band is a dead giveaway. So the killdeer should be one that you learn quickly and easily. Then I'm going to jump now to 2 of our really northern plovers. The black-bellied plover is our largest plover. It's 29 centimeters, a little bit bigger than a killdeer. It's very robust, but this bird, unlike the killdeer nests pretty much everywhere. It could be nesting on your local golf course or in a car park somewhere. The black-bellied plover nests way up in the high Arctic, and we only see them in southern Manitoba during their migration season. And when we do see them, they can either be on habitat like beaches or mud flats, or sometimes even in fields. Sometimes we'll even see them on plowed fields and looking for tasty morsels to eat. So as the name suggests, black-bellied plover, a very black belly, that is quite obvious, and the black belly distinct and contrasting from the silvery scaffold back. So I know these birds are called black-bellied plover, but since they're bigger than a golden plover, I like to call them platinum plovers. But they are, with that silver back and the black belly, they should be unmistakable. There's a bit of a white stripe down the neck as well, and they're really large and robust. There's also a feature there called black armpits, which I'll come back to in a minute to explain, because that's a useful feature to separate them from this bird. And this bird that you see now on your screen is American golden plover. And the American golden plover is only a little bit smaller than a killdeer, 26 centimeters. And it's also got a black belly, much like the black-bellied plover. And its back, instead of being silver, is kind of a golden color, although to be honest, it's a bit of a grayish golden color. It's not it's not necessarily quite as golden as the name implies. It's a bit more dappled, black, white, gray, and sort of that warm orangey golden brown. It should be fairly easy to identify, and because of the gold, the white stripe down the neck is more obvious on the golden plover than the black-bellied plover. You may notice in the photo it's a bit daintier of a bird. I find them very sleek, very elegant, and the bill is a bit thinner. So I know I said I would focus on breeding plumages, but I just wanted to compare the bill, so I put two side by side. This is the golden plover here, which will be on the left of your screen with a thin bill, versus the black-bellied plover on the right with a thicker bill and the more robust shape. So just a quick comparison. That's what they look like in non-breeding plumage. And here's my reference to the black armpits. So when the black-bellied plovers fly, they have these dark feathers in the axillaries or the armpits, which the golden plover doesn't. So that's a useful feature too. So those are our three big plovers: killdeer, black-bellied, and American golden. And then we have two little guys, the semi-palmated plover, which is about 18 centimeters, so much smaller than a killdeer. Only one breast band, not two. It's quite similar to a killdeer in the pattern, but that single breast band is a very easy way to tell them apart. And also the orange color of the legs and the bill, you'll notice, has orange at the base and a black tip. Now these guys nest up in the Arctic and subarctic. They nest in Churchill, Manitoba, if you ever get up to Hudson Bay and Churchill region. And we see them here in the south on migration at various habitats, often in mudflats and the typical wetlands where you're looking for shorebirds. We have one other, it's the piping plover. This bird nests in southern Manitoba. However, piping plover is now extremely rare in Manitoba. We basically only have one pair nesting every other year or something like that. Sometimes two pairs if we're lucky. And a lot has to do with water levels. They're very pale, very sandy colored. They really blend in with beaches. Some of you may remember they used to nest on Grand Beach, which is a pretty typical habitat for this bird. They're similar to a semi-palmated in that they only have one breast band, but the face is much plainer. See how it's all white on the forecrown and the area we call the lores, which is in between the bill and the eye. So they're really a paler bird. If you do see piping plovers and you're sure of your ID, and especially if you manage to get a photo, then you need to contact someone like Amanda because they are very sensitive, and sometimes we have to mobilize protection from the likes of dogs and things that can interfere with nesting on beaches. Okay, so that completes the plover family. And again, if there were any questions or anything there, you can type them in the chat. It would be good for me just so I know that I'm not talking to the wall. But that completes the plovers. We'll move on to the avocets and stilts, or the recurve bills. These are birds that generally they have extremely long, thin legs and extremely long, thin bills. And their foraging strategy most typically is to sway their bill from side to side in the water. So if you've ever seen an avocet feed, it uses that curve on its bill to scrape the bottom of the water, and it does it in a side-to-side motion so that the bill stays basically along the water, along the bottom, and then it grabs tasty morsels that it feels with its bill. This family is easy because we only have two species and only one of them is regular. That's our avocet. There's our avocet, American avocet. You really no prizes for identifying this one correctly. Blue legs, long legs. This thin, long bill with its upward curve, so distinctive, unmistakable. Plus, in breeding season, they have that peachy colored head and neck, and of course the black and white wings. So really unmistakable, very large, 46 centimeters. And they do nest in southern Manitoba. Some of our wetlands are alkali areas, sometimes sandy areas as well. And they even start to flock up in Manitoba, which is awesome fun to watch when they do that side-to-side sweeping motion in a big flock like what you're seeing here. They're awesome to watch. This photo is actually in the fall, and some of the birds are starting to lose the salmon color on the head, but even without the salmon color, you can still identify them easily. And then the other member of this family is the black-necked stilt. The stilt has arguably the longest legs in ratio to its body of any of our North American birds. It is, as you can see, it kind of looks a bit lanky, like a bit ridiculously lanky. And it has to lean forward when it's feeding because its legs are so long. But it too kind of points its bill down and sways in the water. It is easy to identify those red legs and the black and white body, but it is quite rare. So if you see a black-necked stilt, you are doing very, very well. Probably Whitewater Lake in southwestern Manitoba is your best chance of seeing this one, but it is a rarity in Manitoba. Okay, and next we're going to move to the Sandpipers. We've got 26, so I'm going to have to there's a good question there on why the long legs. It is probably the long legs enable them to feed in deep water, and I'll try to circle back to that if we have time. But we've got 26 Sandpipers, so I'm going to try to get through them quickly. But it does relate to water depth and their ability to feed in deeper water. Okay, so for the Sandpipers then, I'm going to talk about 26 species, starting from the biggest. Sandpipers generally have long bills, and they generally probe for food in the mud or the sand or the water in soft substrate. They're generally using the bill to probe for food. So they're a bit more of a touchy-feely and a bit less visual like the plovers. So this is the marbled godwit. I think I might have gone too quick there. The marbled godwit has basically our biggest, same size as an avocet, but a bit more robust. It's rich, warm color, it's large size, and then the godwits have this bill that is upturned like an avocet, but thicker. It's not as long and thin, it's a bit more robust and stout. And it's got an orange base with a black tip, or sometimes as much as half orange and half black. And that is very distinctive. So the avocet, of course, has an all black bill. And there's one other really good trick with the marbled godwits. Here, this flight photo, you can see that they have these beautiful, beautiful cinnamon underwings. So there are two of them in flight. You see that the orange bill stands out, and you can see that the cinnamon underwings really stand out as well. So that's a good, useful check to see the cinnamon of the underwings. There's another godwit which is a bit smaller, only 39 centimeters. It's the Hudsonian godwit. The Hudsonian godwit breeds in the north, breeds at Churchill, for example, unlike the marbled godwit, which breeds in the prairie grasslands. So we only see the Hudsonians in spring and fall, and they're harder to find for that reason. And they're a bit more brick red below. They have a very similar bill, but they're smaller and a little bit thinner. And they don't have the cinnamon underwing. Instead, they have a really dark wing with a white stripe. So here's a photo of a flock in flight. And you should notice the tail with that white on black pattern, rump on tail tip, and you should notice the white stripe that's visible in the wing. And then, of course, the red underparts would make them pretty easy to tell from a marbled godwit. A little bit smaller and a little bit redder. Okay, so the two godwits, the bill goes up, and then the curlew family, the bill goes down. The bill curves down, or decurved is the word that we often use for down curves, and recurve is the word we use for up curves. And the whimbrel is our only curlew in Manitoba. There is long-bill curlew if you go to Saskatchewan, but not in Manitoba. So because it's our only curlew, the whimbrel is really quite easy to identify. They do nest in Churchill in northern Manitoba, but they only migrate through southern Manitoba, and they're not easy. They're not easy to find in the south. You might get them sometimes on the beaches of the big lakes like Lake Winnipeg or Lake Manitoba. You may sometimes get them in mudflats too, but they're tough to find in southern Manitoba. Much easier to find if you make a trip to Churchill. And they have a bit of a stripy head. They have that down curve on the bill, and the large size with the, I would say, brown cryptic plumage. Cryptic meaning it's very hard to see. It's very nicely camouflaged. And so when you do see one, it's the combination of that bill and the large size and the brown, it's pretty easy to identify. The head stripes as well are a further addition. Okay, moving to the willet. The willet is quite large, 38 centimeters. So it's basically similar size to the Hudsonian godwit I mentioned earlier. It is a very plain gray looking bird. It's got dark legs and a dark bill. The bill is straight. The body is gray, although there are little black and white markings and fleckings. So it just looks like a big gray shorebird until here's another shot of one from the side just to show you, and then until the wings open up. And when the wings open up, the willet really changes character altogether from gray and cryptic to very showy all of a sudden. So they use the wings to display, and they fly around and call with their wings. And that black and white stripe on the wing is immediately seals the deal for identification. So if you're in doubt, wait for them to open their wings, and it really helps. And just because I mentioned the Hudsonian godwit has a white stripe, there's a comparison for you. So Hudsonian godwit's on the left of your screen and willet on the right of your screen. The willet is even more dramatically black and white, thick stripes. And of course, you won't confuse them for other reasons either, but just to show you the comparison. Next, we move to the two yellow legs, and the two yellow legs, you really should have a good clue by the brightness of yellow of their legs. They have very yellow legs, so good name. And that when you see largish shorebirds with bright yellow legs, then and a gray body, you know you've got one of the two. So the big one is the greater yellow legs. It's quite large. It's around 36 centimeters, so it's almost as big as the willet. Not quite, but pretty close. The bright yellow legs, its bill it's basically straight, but it has a very subtle upturn. I'm hoping you can see in that photo, it just curves up. It's quite thick at the base, and the base is usually a pale color. In breeding season, it'll usually look yellowish. It may look gray, but it'll usually be pale as compared to the dark tip. And that is one thing to look for. Obviously, size, is another useful feature to compare it with this guy, the lesser yellow legs. So greater at 36 centimeters versus lesser at 27 centimeters. There's a big side difference. If you see them side by side, pretty easy. But the lesser has more of a thin bill, and it's a bit more needle-like, and it's shorter. So you can see here the bill is really not that much longer than the head compared to the greater, where the bill is longer and thicker, and that little slight upturn. And here's the lesser for comparison. They're a bit tricky. They take a bit of practice unless you see them side by side when they're easy, but you usually can tell them apart by looking at the bill. Now moves on to the upland sandpiper, which is an easy bird and a bit unusual. This is not a bird that you'll usually see mixed in with other shorebirds on the mudflat. Instead, you will see it in grasslands and prairie habitat. They can sometimes be close to lakes and things, but their main habitat is grassland. And they love to sit up on fence posts, and sometimes they even sit up on wires and telephone poles. And they have an amazing wolf whistle call in the breeding season. So if you hear somebody wolf whistling at you in the prairie, it's probably an upland sandpiper. And they really look kind of goofy. They have this long, thin neck, this sort of pigeon-like head. The eye in the middle of it looks kind of large. And they're pretty unmistakable in that sort of goofy way. But they're a truly awesome grassland shorebird. And they nest in a lot of southern Manitoba, all the way across the south, as far east as the tall grass prairie. Next, we move to the short-billed dowitcher. So this one nests up at Churchill as well, so nesting in the suburb. You'll only see it in southern Manitoba in migration, but we do get a lot of them. It's quite a common shorebird in the migration. So for this one, with the dowitchers, and there are two species, you're looking for a long, straight bill, and you're looking for the way they use the bill in particular. They probe in and out very quickly like a sewing machine. They really use that bill like it's a sewing machine, in and out of the mud, feeding at great speed. And that feeding style is quite distinctive. If it's deep water, it might be hard to see the bill, but the style is very distinctive. So the short bill has this very sort of salmon coloration to it, at least in the prairie provinces it does. There actually are some different subspecies in Canada. But this is what our short bills look like. So this sort of salmony underparts combined with this straight bill and that sewing machine feeding action. There is another useful feature with the dowitchers, and that's this what I call cigar mark on the back. So I'm just going to show you that. On the back of the birds, they have this white stripe that goes up the back. For some reason, that gets described as cigar. Probably just bird is like using cigar references, I guess. So again, if you see this bird on the ground and you're not quite sure, then you can wait, and hopefully when they open their wings, you can see this white stripe on the back. That is quite unique. The yellow legs will have a white rump across, but only the dowitchers will have this white stripe up the back. So it's a good mark too. Now, there is another dowitcher called the long-billed dowitcher. Unfortunately, the difference between a long-billed dowitcher and a short-billed dowitcher is not very much. They are very different, and I don't want to spend too much time on them because they are so tough. But here's a photo of a long-billed dowitcher. They have this more barred pattern on the sides. I'm going to go back. Here's our short-billed dowitcher. You can see how it kind of looks spotty on the side of the breast, and it'll become a little bit more barred on the flanks, but it's quite spotty up here. So here's our long billed, and it really looks much more barred there. The bill is slightly longer, but that is very hard to tell. But another mark is these feathers at the back. Can you see these white edges? They're dark with a lot of white, dark with a lot of white, dark with a lot of white, and then there's a little bit of orange mixed in. That's more contrasting and less orange than the short bills, which look like this. So that's a tricky one. That's a bit more advanced. When you get good at your shorebirds, you can practice telling the dowitchers apart. But if you're not sure, it's one of two. You can write down dowitcher species, and that's good enough. And when they're far away, that's often all we can do is to say dowitcher species, one of the two. Okay, I'm going to talk about two unique shorebirds that aren't exactly shorebirds in the sense of habitat. The woodcock is basically a forest bird. Mostly you'll see it in shrubland and forest or open woodlands type of habitat. They're a nocturnal shorebird and they're a forest shorebird, so they really are quite special, quite unique. You're not likely to mistake them with anything else, and you're not likely to see them alongside of any other shorebirds on a mudflat. So as a nocturnal, or at least crepuscular species, meaning they come out at dawn and dusk a lot, this large eye, very distinctive. This pattern on the top of the head with the dark and the orange stripes across is very unique. There's nothing else that has that. And then that beautiful gray and brown cryptic marking compares with the salmon underparts. It's a tricky bird to see well, but very, very distinctive. I don't think any other shorebird has horizontal stripes on the head like that. The Wilson snipe has stripes on the head, but they run the length of the head, which is much more normal. So here's our Wilson snipe. The Wilson snipe is a bit of a all of the above shorebird. You'll see it in forests, you'll see it in wetlands, you will see it on mudflats with other shorebirds. You'll see it in wet ditches, you'll see it, you know, up in the north, in sort of tundra habitats. You'll see it just about everywhere. They're amazingly versatile, amazingly widespread. They're like the name snipe suggests, and I'm pretty sure that words like sniper and things like that come from these guys. The long thin bill is characteristic, along with this brown cryptic plumage and that stripy head. When they open up their wings, they have this amazing underwing black and white pattern, but that is usually, you can't see that when the wings are closed, of course. And then they have these very special tail feathers that are used in their flight display. And then here are the stripes on the face. So you can see what I mean by the stripes. The stripe through the eye, which we call an eye stripe, the stripe above the eye, which we call a supercilium, the stripes on the crown, including the pale stripe, which we call a median crown stripe. So very stripy head, very brown, quite a reddish brown, and that long straight bill. And then the habitat that you see, like this bird is displaying in Aspen Parkland, sitting up on a stump and calling. So pretty easy by that combination of features. It's smaller than a whimbrel. I mentioned whimbrel earlier being brown and cryptic, and it has a straight bill, not a down curved bill. So you shouldn't make that mistake. Okay, now we're starting to get into the smaller ones that are harder. The bigger shorebirds are easier to see because of their size, and they tend to be fairly easy. The rest of the talk gets a little bit trickier, so I'm gonna try to spend some time in them, although I see that we're already well into this, so I will do my best. This is where the challenge is, so if you feel like you know, this is starting to get hard, then that's okay. Just takes time and practice to learn them. So the red knot is that one I mentioned that migrates across the hemisphere, nesting in the high Arctic, migrating all the way to southern South America. In breeding plumage, with this sort of also have this unique pattern of their red face and red underparts, contrasting with a gray back. There is some, it's not uniquely gray, there is some black and orange flecking in the pattern of the back, which actually serves them well in the Arctic breeding grounds. They camouflage with the lichen covered rocks up there, gray rocks with red lichen, and they can nest in amongst them and hide. So this colorful pattern is actually quite useful. They're robust, thick set. I would say to me they look quite strong, and they have this straight bill and the large size. So 27 centimeters. If the numbers help, they're about 27 centimeters and well built. The ruddy turnstone is slightly smaller, but easy to identify, unmistakable. That the bill is the really distinctive feature, that it's like a dagger. It's so pointy, and as the name suggests, they're very good at turning stones to feed. They flip them over and grab whatever they can find underneath the stones, hence the name turnstone. With that bright red back, with those bright red legs, and with this sort of harlequin face pattern, which, by the way, is unique in every individual. You can actually identify turnstones to individual by their face pattern if you get really, really good. They're quite easy to identify. And the bright red legs are another one that you can always fall back on. And then we have, well, technically we have 3 phalarope species, but I'm only going to mention 2, the 2 common ones. As I mentioned at the very start, phalaropes are interesting because they're polyandrous. So meaning that females pair with multiple males and the males do the incubating and the brood rearing. So this is the Wilson's phalarope. This is a female here. She is more colorful than him. She has this very distinctive black line that goes through the eye, down the neck, and then it sort of becomes this chestnut line that goes around the rest of the lower neck and onto the scapulars like so. So that black stripe becoming chestnut, and then there's sort of a peachy or buffy wash across the neck as well. That's really quite distinctive. You'll see them in southern Manitoba. They nest in our prairie wetlands, even sedge meadows and sort of shallow wetlands actually. And you will see them. You'll see them both foraging by swimming, and you'll see them sort of on shorelines, like as you see here. There's a male, just to show you, a male is not as colorful as the female, but he has a similar pattern, just less pronounced. And this is the redneck phalarope, which is noticeably smaller than the Wilsons, only 20 centimeters. Rednecks are quite a small bird. They nest up at Churchill, so they don't nest in the prairie region. You'll only see them in migration coming through. And when we see them in migration, most often they're swimming in small prairie potholes or lakes, or on less often we see the rednecks foraging in the mud, and more often we see them swimming. And in particular, they have a really cool behavior of swimming around in a circle, which creates a vortex, and the vortex raises small invertebrate food to the surface, which they can then feed on. So if you see tightly spinning circles out there, little tiny shorebirds spinning in circles, it's probably these guys. And if you see them at this time of year in May, they will have this bright red neck, which is on a gray head. They don't have the stripe like the Wilsons either. But the red neck is a bit of a giveaway too. Okay, next a really interesting one is the solitary sandpiper. Solitaries are about 22 centimeters. They're a bit less common on mudflats and a bit more likely to see them along rivers and things. They actually nest in the boreal forest, so they do nest in southern Manitoba, but in places like Riding Mountain and the southeast. And they're quite unique in that they actually nest in trees, which is the only one of our shorebirds to do that. And that's an adaptation to living in a forested habitat. They have a white eye ring, and that's important, and they have spots on the back. So I remember the back. And then their legs are yellowish, greenish yellow, not bright yellow like a yellow legs. They're similar to yellow legs in that regard, but the legs are not bright yellow, and they're smaller than. And then the spotted sandpiper has spots on the underpart. So unlike the solitary, spots on the back, spotted has spots on the underpart. And in breeding plumage, they lose them in the fall, but in breeding plumage, they are the only one of our shorebirds that has dark spots on the underside. So that alone is quite unique. Then that orange bill with a black tip, which is straight, is also quite unique. And they're also a polyandrous species. They bob their tail a lot. That can be another useful feature to identify these guys. If you see them, you see them wagging their butt end, that's a common behavior of this buddy. Okay, in a similar sort of size is the stilt sandpiper. Stilts are about 22 centimeters, and they have barred underparts, which is also quite unique. They're the horizontal bars on the underparts, and then they kind of move up to become a bit blotchy on the neck, or even streaky on the neck. And then they have this chestnut in the ear coverts and the lows and the crown as well. And they also have sort of duller yellow legs, but their bill is another useful feature. So the bill curves downward, but it's not very downward. So you got a slight down curve, you've got a dark bill, you've got barred underparts, a little bit of chestnut in the ear and on top of the head, and there's your stilt sandpiper. Remember the dark bill for that'll come relevant in a minute. Dunlin also has a dark bill. It's got maybe a little bit more curve than a stilt there. You can compare if you want. There's the stilt curve. There's the Dunlin curve. But the Dunlin in breeding plumage is also unmistakable. So this big black splotch on the belly, this beautiful red back. Actually, some people used to call them redback sandpipers. So, you know, you'll remember the ruddy turnstone has a red back, but it has its distinctive bill and that harlequin face. So should not have any problem with Dunlin and turnstone. And of course, you can't see the legs in this photo, but they are dark legs. And then pectoral, I mentioned pectoral just because of this, just comparing the stilt. So this pectoral also has that subtle down, but it's got a quite noticeable orange bill with a black tip. So you shouldn't confuse it with a stilt for that reason. And it doesn't have the barred underparts. It's got a white belly, and then it's got this spotty breast, and there's usually a very sharp line between the two of them. That feature there, the sharp demarcation between the breast and the belly, is a giveaway. And it has quite yellow legs. You're not likely to mistake it for a yellow legs. It has a different color and a different shape, and then of course the orange bill, but it also has bright yellow legs. Buff-breasted is a high Arctic breeder. It's very difficult bird to see in Manitoba. It's always a treat to see them. It's a bit more, you're less likely to see this one on mudflats and more likely to see them in flooded fields or even stubble fields or things like that. So they're a bit different in habitat, and that's usually a clue. They also have this sort of soft buff or warm buff color that goes from the face all the way down. This very long shape that you can see, and a shorter straight black bill. That's a very, very distinctive bird in my opinion. The thing about them is they're hard to find. So if you look at the bottom photo, probably the black-bellied plover there stands out because of its large size and its pale color. But there are 1, 2, 3, 4 buff-breasted sandpipers in that photo, which with that buff color merge right into the stubble. So they are enlarged on the top for you. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I just wanted to show that just to give you sort of a sense of the different habitat type to look for the buff-breasted. So this is just a good old stubble field. Now, you do see buff-breasteds in May, but they're much more common in August. They're much more common in Manitoba on the southbound journey than on the northbound journey. Sanderling's a bit of a tricky one. They're interesting in that we mostly see them on the big beaches. You're more likely to see them at Grand Beach or, you know, Lake Manitoba, Lake Winnipeg, and you're less likely to see them in the mudflats. So if you're going to a prairie marsh, you're probably not going to see sanderling. However, there are always exceptions, and you will see them. They're fairly large, 20 centimeters compared to the little guys. They have a red head, although the problem with that red head, here's some sanderlings where the red is really quite faint. So that is, but they're generally very pale, grizzled gray, and they get even paler than that, look ghostly pale. And then they have this white wing stripe as well coming through. So you can, and they're bigger than the peeps, which we'll get to in a minute. So usually you won't have a problem with telling them apart from the peeps just by size. So here are the peeps. They are from top in a clockwise direction, they are least sandpiper, white rump sandpiper, semi-palmated sandpiper, and bared sandpiper in this photo, but I will going to talk about them in a more stylized way. Here's my chart. Peeps refers to the really tiny shorebirds. These are definitely the hardest ones. You will, these ones you can wait until you get more advanced if you need to, because they're tough. For me, when I'm looking through a flock, my first rule of thumb is to decide if they're a more reddish brown color, which puts them in this column for me, or if they're a more grayish color, which puts them in this column for me. And then there's kind of two sizes. There's the little guys, which are bairds and white rump, and then there's the tiny guys, the least sandpiper and the semi, and they are just so tiny. So they're like at least sandpiper, the smallest shorebird in the world. You can remember 13 centimeters. It's really a tiny little bird. The least has yellow legs, and that helps, and a more golden brown color. The semi has dark legs and a more gray color. And then there's a little bit of a difference in the wing length. So let me talk about that. So we'll start with the two big ones. Here's the bairds. So look at the way this wing sweep well back beyond the tail. The tail tip falls about here, and the wings are really swept back, making it really pointed. And you can see what I mean about the sort of the browner color with the dark legs on this bird. And it's small size, 19 centimeters. Versus the white rump, look at it, it's got that same really long swept back wings. This one you can actually see where the tail tip is. That's the tail tip there. This is one wing, and this is the other wing crossing over. So the wings are really long. The white, as I hope you can see in this photo, it's a bit more grayish brown and a bit less brown. Maybe that's a bit subjective, I admit. These two are very hard. If you can see it, this pink at the base of the bill is a good mark. And as the name suggests, the white rump has a white rump all across the band. So unlike the others that have this dark, I'm going back to the sanderling here, the sanderling and all of the others, the bairds and the least, have this dark line through the middle of the tail, which the white rump doesn't have. So it has a white band across the tail. So if you see that, or if you see the pink, then you're good. However, if you don't see that, it's very difficult. So those are the two little ones, and then the tiny ones are the semi. And I hope you can see that the wings are a bit shorter. There's the tail tip right there. There's the wings, so they're basically equal. Semis are only 16 centimeters. The wings fall basically at the tail tip. Semis are quite a gray color, and they have dark legs versus, and there's, just to quickly show you, there's the semi-palmation. That's what semi-palmation means. It means it's not fully webbed, but it has a little bit of webbing at the base. And then you can compare that with the least sandpiper. So the least sandpiper has more of a golden brown versus the semi, which is more of a gray brown. The least sandpiper has yellow legs and a tiny size. It's also got a bit more of a droop on that bill, but really tiny, 15 centimeters. Sorry, I think I said 13. I was wrong, 15. They are a good but delightful challenge. And that ends this talk on shorebirds. Just under the hour. Perhaps Amanda, you can open up the mics and we'll see if that works. We can have a couple of minutes. I did see one question related to black-necked stilts that I can answer in a minute.
There were a couple questions there, Christian, and thank you so much for your presentation. Oh, looks like we're getting even more questions. So I think the first one was from Richard. Has it been too late this spring to see shorebirds at Okamic?
No, absolutely not. The whole month of May right to the end, and even the first week of June is excellent. Okamic has some nesting shorebirds. as well as the migrants. But a lot depends on the water level. So if the water is very deep, you won't see so many. If the water is shallow, you see a lot. So the trick with shorebirding is to find the shallow spots. Sometimes that's in a field with flooded standing water. Sometimes it's on the edges of a wetland. But wherever there's shallow water, for the rest of the month of May and the first week of June, you can be looking.
Perfect, thank you. So then we also have from Casey, where to find black-necked stilts nest.
Well, they actually nest on the flats right on the ground. If you were seriously lucky, you would find them. They have nested in the past years at Whitewater Lake. They do attract a bit of attention, so you have to be a little bit careful. So I'm not going to reveal exact locations on them, but they, because they're so rare, but they nest right on the ground. Actually, I've seen them nesting on alkali flats, and it amazes me that a sitting bird would stand out. But sometimes they'll nest in a little bit of sparse vegetation on the edge of the wetland. And that's what they did when they were nesting at Whitewater Lake. That's where they were.
Perfect. We've got another question here from Matthew that says, are eye rings a type of feather or something else?
That's a really good point. So you can see the killdeer slide here. That is actually a piece of, that is actually skin, not feather. And mostly we use the word eye ring for both. So there are some cases where there's a ring of feathers around the eye, creating a ring, which is true in the solitary sandpiper. And there's some cases where it's skin, as in the case of the killdeer here, where the skin has a different color and it creates a ring. So it's really, it just refers to where there's something that's a distinct ring and is contrasting. It can be either feather or skin. And if it becomes really big and wide, then it might get another name like a wattle or, you know, a facial disc or whatever. But it's yeah, facial skin, sorry, or what? But it could be either feather or skin.
Okay, thank you. So I think we'll end with a question from Jillian, where she put sounds for ID. So I'm thinking she means,
yes.
Is sound a good way to ID shorebirds, different species of shorebirds?
Yes, it is. And in the interest of time, I did not talk about it. I did mention the upland sandpiper and its call. You can identify an upland sandpiper by sound at just about a mile away, I think. But it's also very useful for some of the other ones. If you get really good, you can identify them by their flight calls. That's tricky, but remember, for example, I talked about dowitchers and the difficulty of separating long-billed dowitcher versus short-billed dowitcher. Actually, sometimes the flight call, which is often described as doo-doo-doo on the short bill versus keek keek on the long bill, and which is pretty subtle, you've got to admit. But sometimes the sounds really help, actually, and especially things like marbled godwit and upland sandpiper, they'll really help you to find them. If you know this, if you know their territorial song, then you'll find them a lot more quickly.
Perfect, good to know. Like Krista said in the comments here, we could have another whole presentation on sounds, I'm sure. So yeah, we've reached just past 2 o'clock now. So we're gonna be ending the webinar shortly. But the leftover questions I will pass along to Christian, and then I can pass the answers back to all of you guys. And we will be posting this webinar online. I'm going to try for YouTube. We'll see how that goes. If not, we'll find some other method of getting it out there. And yeah, we have resources available for identifying shorebirds on the Manitoba IBA website. I sent that link out to everyone who had registered. And you can certainly email me if you have questions on where to find it. And yeah, thank you for spending time with us today. A big thank you to Dr. Christian Artuso. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. So thank you very much.